The justice system does not scare easily. It dulls fear by design, sanding down horror into procedure, turning blood and grief into filings, deadlines, and motions. After decades on the bench, you learn that violence is loud, predictable, and sloppy. But competence is quiet, patient, and disciplined, and that is what keeps judges awake. I served 32 years in a black robe, 6 months shy of retirement when this file resurfaced in my mind, because it never left. I handled murders, rackets, riots, and grandstanding lawyers who thought volume was proof. This case stayed with me, not as a nightmare, but as a warning label I could not peel off. I was not scared by the violence. I have seen violence up close, by the book and off the rails, and it rarely surprises. I was scared by competence, by people who did everything right, left no fingerprints, spoke in clean sentences, and treated the law like a chessboard instead of a sermon. The name on the docket was the Commonwealth versus Park Tae-sok and Associates. The charges were clinical. RICO conspiracy, money laundering across ports and shell companies, attempted murder arranged through intermediaries, obstruction dressed as compliance. No fireworks, no melodrama, just a stack of paper that weighed more than a brick. The press wanted a villain and a heroine. They found one in Nneka Abiola. On cable panels, she was a hero, a brave insider who stood up to monsters. On the other channels, she was a mercenary, a paid turncoat chasing immunity. Both labels were lazy. Both were wrong. In my courtroom, Nneka Abiola was neither. She was stillness. She sat without fidgeting, hands folded, eyes forward, the kind of quiet that refuses to perform. She answered questions the way people do when they have decided the truth is cheaper than theater. No speeches, no tears, no smoke and mirrors. I have learned to distrust clean narratives. Justice is not a fairy tale, and it does not hand out gold stars. It is a mechanism meant to keep society from cracking under pressure. And when it works, it looks boring. When it fails, it looks righteous. That is a hard truth, and it does not trend well. Park Tae-sok understood that. He never raised his voice. He never threatened. He never denied what could be proven. He let others talk themselves into corners while he stood where the lines were drawn. Watching him was like watching a man read the rule book while everyone else argued about morals. People ask what scared me about that case. It was not the gunshots described, the bodies implied, or the money counted. It was the competence on display, the discipline to stay inside the lines, the patience to wait out outrage. That kind of order is dangerous because it can wear a suit and pass inspection. I will tell you this plainly, with no drama. This was the only case that ever scared me, because it proved that the law can be mastered without being broken. And when that happens, there is no free lunch, only consequences deferred, and judges must decide whether restraint is cowardice or the last tool left. I am telling you this now because memory fades and myths harden. Years later, people prefer clean endings and simple villains, but courtrooms are factories of compromise. The work is cut and dried only in hindsight, and even then, it's mostly guesswork. I learned early that good judges count costs, not applause, and they do the math quietly, knowing someone will call them cold. That is why I am careful with fear. Fear makes people sloppy, and sloppiness leaves holes. Competence fills them. In this case, the filings were perfect, the timelines clean, the witnesses coached just enough to survive cross. It was old school work, disciplined, patient, no fingerprints. I watched the attorneys circle the facts like fishermen, hoping for a bite, while the real catch stayed deep. That's when I knew the danger was not noise, but silence, not chaos, but order. By the time Nneka Abiola left the stand, I understood the risk clearly. She was not reckless, and she was not heroic. She was precise. Precision unsettles systems built on spectacle. The jury sensed it, even if they could not name it. I wrote notes and kept my face still, because warning signs are useless if you flinch. This case demanded steadiness, patience, and an eye for consequences that would come later. That is why it scared me, and why I am telling you now, before the noise returns, louder than truth, dressed up as certainty, selling comfort on credit with interest due. Later arrives, and it always collects, no matter who pretends surprise, shrugs, cashes checks, or calls it history. When Park Tae-sok entered my courtroom, the room adjusted before he did. He wore shackles like accessories, not restraints, and he moved with the calm of a man who expected doors to open eventually. Power that needs to shout is already bleeding. His never raised its voice. He did not scan the gallery. He did not smirk at counsel. He stood, hands still, eyes level, as if the building belonged to him on layaway. I have learned to distrust men who make silence do their work. They are usually billing interest. "State your name for the record," the clerk said. "Park Tae-sok," he answered, plain as weather. That was it. No honorifics, no defiance, no performance. The jurors leaned forward without knowing why. Gravity does that. You feel it before you can measure it. Organized crime is often sold as chaos, a circus of violence and ego. That sells tickets. The truth is duller and more dangerous. It is infrastructure. Ports run on schedules. Unions run on leverage. Money moves through channels built to look legitimate because legitimacy is cheaper than bullets. Park understood that math. I watched him listen. Listening was his tell. He let other people fill the air, then selected the one sentence that mattered and treated it like a receipt. When a lawyer tried to needle him, Park answered with a nod, the kind that says, "I hear you, and I'm not impressed." "Mr. Park, did you order the shipment?" the prosecutor asked. "I oversee assets. Orders are for retail." A few jurors smiled. That worried me. Charm is a lubricant, and machines slide when you overuse it. My distrust was instinctive and earned. 30 years teaches you patterns. Men like Park don't threaten witnesses. They don't pound tables. They make people redundant. They build systems where resistance looks like bad business. Violence is a contingency, not a plan. At sidebar, defense whispered, "He's respectful, Your Honor." "Respectful isn't harmless," I said. "Proceed." Park never argued with the bench. He never needed to. He treated the law like a load-bearing wall. Test it, don't ram it. When evidence landed close, he adjusted posture, not story. Shackles clinked once, a reminder, then went quiet again. I noticed how others reacted around him. Bailiffs stood straighter, lawyers softened verbs, even the air seemed to wait its turn. That is controlled menace, the kind that does not advertise. It promises nothing and delivers consistency. During a recess, a juror muttered, "Kai's ice cold." Another answered, "Yeah, but he ain't stupid." They were both right, and that combination has toppled cities. Park spoke once more when asked about threats. "I don't need them. Contracts work better." No sneer, no smile, just a fact, dropped like a coin into a well. You could hear it fall. By day's end, I understood the center of mass in that room. It was not the charges, not the headlines, not the theatrics. It was a man who built order where others expected chaos, and who trusted time to finish jobs he started quietly. I asked him once softly, "Do you understand the risk here?" He met my eyes and said, "Risk is unmanaged variance." That answer landed heavy. He was not bluffing. He was pricing outcomes, betting the house on patience. That is how infrastructure survives. It does not thrill, it endures. I wrote a note to myself. Never confuse calm with mercy. In cases like this, mercy is a rumor. Order is the product. And when order is manufactured by men who never raise their voices, the court must decide whether to regulate the machine or pretend it isn't running. I chose regulation, knowing it would feel unsatisfactory, square, and necessary, like a fuse that blows quietly, saving the house while everyone complains about the dark. It was not bravery, it was duty, plain and final. That is why I kept my face still and my rulings tight. When power whispers, the court must listen harder, not louder. Men like Park don't test your courage, they test your discipline. And discipline, once cracked, never looks dramatic. It just fails, piece by piece, until someone else owns the building. Park Ji-hoon arrived wrapped in inheritance, the way some men wear winter coats they never chose. Publicly, he was the heir, polished, Ivy-adjacent, photographed at charity galas, speaking the language of reform with a straight face. Privately, he wanted to burn the place down from the inside, not for applause, but for oxygen. He sat at council table with the posture of someone accustomed to rooms deciding things without him. When asked to state his relationship to Park Tae-sok, he paused. "My father," he said, and the pause mattered more than the words. I have seen this before. Empires don't always fall to rivals. They rot along bloodlines. Internal betrayal cases carry a special quiet, the sound of doors closing politely. Ji-hoon understood the machinery because he grew up inside it, listening to men talk numbers while pretending not to hear threats. "Why now?" the prosecutor asked. "Because it won't stop," Ji-hoon replied. "Because it eats people." No melodrama, no raised voice, just a man cutting a cord he never asked for. He described shell companies like rooms in a house, ports like valves, favors like interest-bearing notes. He spoke plainly, which unnerved the jury. Plain speech makes lies expensive. In public, Ji-hoon played the dutiful son. He praised governance, talked transparency, smiled for cameras. In private, he mapped weaknesses. He planned to dismantle the empire by forcing sunlight into corners built to stay cool. That takes patience and a tolerance for loneliness. Loneliness followed him like a shadow. Family protects its own until it doesn't. At sidebar, defense called him bitter. "Objection," I said. "Argument." He met my eyes once, asking nothing. I recognized that look. It's the look of someone who knows the bill will come due and is ready to pay it. Quiet defiance isn't loud, it's steady. "Did you fear retaliation?" the prosecutor pressed. "Yes," Ji-hoon said. "I still do." "Then why proceed?" "Because fear isn't a plan." I wrote that down, not because it was poetic, but because it was operational. Internal betrayals fail when fear runs the calendar. Ji-hoon had set his own. There was no romance here. He wasn't trying to save the world. He was trying to stop the bleeding in a family that called it business. He knew the cost. He also knew that half measures would get people hurt, so he went by the book even when the book was written by men who didn't plan to be read. In my years on the bench, heirs who turn on empires are treated like traitors by everyone except history, which shrugs and moves on. Jurors sensed it. They didn't cheer, they listened. That told me everything. When cross-exam tried to paint him as reckless, he answered, "Reckless is pretending this is normal." A few heads nodded. Old hat arguments don't land forever. I watched Park Tae-sok during Ji-hoon's testimony. The older man didn't flinch. That was the tell. He had priced this risk years ago. Fathers like him expect sons to either inherit or vanish. Resistance is a rounding error. At recess, a bailiff muttered, "Kid's got guts." I said, "Guts don't win cases, records do." Ji-hoon brought records. He brought dates, signatures, routes. He brought the inside map. He didn't ask for mercy, he asked for an end. That is not rebellion. It is accounting. By day end, I understood his role. He wasn't the spark or the bomb. He was the wedge, driven slow and true. Internal fires burn hottest because they know where the beams are. Quiet defiance doesn't topple buildings overnight. It weakens them until someone else decides whether to rebuild or walk away. That decision, like discipline, belongs to the court, and it demands patience, not applause. That patience is old school, maybe, but it works. I have seen flash fail and quiet prevail. Ji-hoon knew he would be called a traitor and a fool. He accepted that tab. He stood anyway, shoulders square, voice level. The jury breathed. The system creaked. Nothing collapsed. Sometimes survival looks boring. It looks like waiting, writing, and letting time do the heavy lifting while everyone else chases noise. That is how structures change without fireworks, without heroes, and without permission. The infinity pool incident looked clean on paper, the kind of incident that slips through news cycles without snagging. Seoul does luxury well. Glass towers, imported marble, security that smiles while watching your hands. The parties sat on top of a private hotel wing, an infinity pool pouring water toward a skyline that pretended consequences were optional. Ji-hoon was there because absence would have been noticed. That was the rule in his family. Show up, smile, drink something expensive, don't ask questions. The guest list read like a balance sheet. Politicians' sons, foreign investors, women hired to look effortless. Music low enough to suggest taste. Cameras everywhere except where it mattered. Witnesses said Ji-hoon leaned on the edge of the pool, shoes off, jacket folded. Someone joked about heirs drowning in champagne. Laughter followed, hollow and practiced. "Careful," a woman said, hand on his arm. "That water's cold." "I'm fine. I just need air." The water shimmered, edge disappearing into nothing. Infinity pools are built to erase boundaries. That's the point. They make danger look like design. Security footage showed Ji-hoon slipping beneath the surface. No thrashing, no shout, just gone. For 9 seconds, 10. Someone laughed, thinking it was a stunt. By the time a hand reached in, he was already drifting. "Hey," a man said, "is he messing around?" He wasn't. They pulled him out coughing, eyes unfocused. A towel appeared, then another. The music never stopped. Someone adjusted the lights. Order restored. The police report came later, tidy and brief. Cramp, it said. Alcohol a contributing factor. No foul play suspected. I read that line twice. At sidebar, the defense repeated it like a lullaby. Accidents happen. Young men drink. Pools are slippery. I nodded, because nodding is sometimes a tool. Inside, I was already done buying it. Cramp is what you write when you don't want to ask who was standing closest. Ji-hoon testified without drama. He said, "I remember the water closing, then nothing." "Did anyone push you?" the prosecutor asked. "No." "Did anyone threaten you that night?" "No." Truth doesn't always volunteer detail. It waits. I watched Park Tae-sok's face as the video played. No reaction. That was the second tell. Men who care about appearances flinch. Men who care about outcomes don't. A detective took the stand, tired, competent, careful. He said, "No signs of struggle. No marks." "Marks aren't required. Intent is," I said. He swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." Outside the record, I wrote a note to myself. Infinity pools hide edges. So do families like this. Witnesses remembered fragments. A hand on Ji-hoon's shoulder, a whispered argument near the bar. "What was said?" the prosecutor asked one guest. "I don't know. It was loud." Loud is convenient. Another guest shrugged. He said, "Rich people do dumb stuff. That's the whole scene." That line got a laugh. I didn't smile. Old age teaches you this. Dumb stuff repeats. Patterns persist. Ji-hoon's mother never attended. His sister sent flowers. Park Tae-sok sent a lawyer. That told me more than any autopsy. At one point, defense tried to lighten the room. "We're not here to criminalize a pool party," counsel said. "No, we're here to understand it. The difference matters." Ji-hoon survived, barely. Survival is inconvenient when someone wanted a lesson delivered quietly. The surface calmed fast, statements aligned, the city moved on. Seoul always does. But I flagged the report, not because it proved anything, but because it tried too hard not to. When paper rushes to reassure, something underneath is restless. "Do you believe it was an accident?" the prosecutor asked Ji-hoon near the end. He paused, long enough to count. He said, "I believe that I was supposed to learn something. About staying in line, about depth, about how easy it is to disappear without a splash." The jury shifted. Old bones recognize that kind of truth. It doesn't scream, it sits. By the time testimony closed, the party felt distant, like a postcard from a place where rules bend. But danger doesn't vanish when music fades. It waits, patient as stone. I kept my voice even when I said it. The court will not accept comfort as explanation. Surface calm is persuasive. It looks like order, but beneath it, currents move. I had seen enough pools, enough families, enough reports to know when calm was cosmetic. That night didn't scare me because someone almost drowned. It scared me because everyone agreed to call it nothing. Nneka Abiola was not supposed to matter that night. She was hired for posture and vigilance, for the look of safety more than the labor of it. The uniform fit, the whistle hung unused, the chair was placed where guests could see her without really seeing her. At parties like that, lifeguards were set dressing, another line item bought to soothe nerves and insurers. She stood anyway, feet planted, eyes scanning. Old habits die hard. Trauma nurses don't unlearn the math of breath and color, of angles and delay. She had worked in ER in Lagos long enough to know when water was the least important problem in a room. When Ji-hoon slipped under, the crowd laughed first. That was normal. Drowning doesn't look like drowning. It looks quiet. It looks like someone thinking. Nneka clocked the angle of his neck, the way his hands didn't claw. She counted seconds without moving her lips. "Hey," someone said behind her. "He's messing around." "No," she said, already stepping off the chair. She didn't run. Running spooks people. She walked fast, eyes fixed, hands ready. When they pulled him out, coughing weakly, she was there before the towel. She knelt, fingers on his carotid, thumb light, patient. "Give him space," she said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Is he okay?" a woman asked, mascara already smudging. "Not yet," Nneka replied. She watched his pupils. Too wide. She watched his chest. Shallow. She watched his hands. Slack, not cramped. Cramp makes pain. This was absence. She rolled him slightly, checked the mouth, the tongue. No water, no froth. That mattered. "Call emergency," she said. A man in a tailored jacket frowned. "We have doctors here." "Call emergency," she repeated. "Now." Someone hesitated. Someone else waved a phone. Nneka leaned in. "Sir," she said to Ji-hoon, "can you hear me?" His eyes flickered. No focus. "Pinch test," a guest offered, trying to help. "Don't," she said. "You'll waste time." She pressed her fingers into his nail bed anyway. Quick and clean. No response. Paralysis, not panic. Her mind flipped files. Organophosphates? Too fast. Benzos? Wrong pattern. She smelled nothing sweet, nothing sharp. She watched the clock in her head. "Did he drink?" "Everyone drank," someone said. "Who poured his last glass?" she asked. Silence. She adjusted his airway, tilted the chin, counted breaths. Too slow. She reached for her bag, not the lifeguard kit, the other one, the one she kept because scripts fail. She had left the hospital, not the training. "You can't inject anything," a man said, voice tight. "This is a private event." She looked up at him. "Then you can watch him die." That shut it down. She didn't inject, she ventilated, slow and steady, masking with what she had, timing compressions to the body in front of her, not the crowd. She whispered to herself, a habit she hated. "Stay," she said. "Stay with me." Police arrived fast, faster than expected. Later, I would learn why. At the time, Aneka saw uniforms and didn't stop. Authority is useful when it understands urgency. One officer crouched. "What do we have?" Aneka said. "Paralysis. Onset sudden. Not drowning. I think a neurotoxin." He blinked. "You're sure?" "I'm early," she replied. "There's a difference." Paramedics took over. She handed off cleanly, concise, no drama. Time down 9 seconds, no aspiration, pupils fixed then reactive, possible exposure oral. They nodded. Professionals know when to listen. Later, statements were taken. A supervisor asked her to soften language. "Neurotoxin sounds scary." "It is," she said. "That's why it matters." She sat alone after, hands steady now that the work was done. Someone offered water. She declined. She wrote notes on a napkin because memory fades and paper doesn't. "Why didn't you just say cramp?" a woman asked, trying to be kind. "Because it wasn't," she said. By morning, the story had been trimmed. Cramp fit better. Cramp didn't require questions. Aneka refused to sign the version handed to her. She corrected it, line by line, neat and legible. "You're making trouble," a lawyer warned. "I'm making a record," she replied. That was her mistake and her gift. Precision under pressure looks like disobedience to people who sell calm. She didn't grandstand, she didn't cry. She did the job the moment demanded and kept her spine straight afterward. When she testified months later, she spoke the same way. No hero talk, no fear. "I observed paralysis inconsistent with drowning. I acted accordingly." "Are you accusing anyone?" defense asked. "No, I'm describing physiology." That scared me more than the pool. She hadn't followed the script because she didn't know it, or because she refused it. Either way, she forced light where comfort wanted shadow. Surface calm is persuasive. It looks like order. But beneath it, currents move. I had seen enough pools, enough families, enough reports to know when calm was cosmetic. That night didn't scare me because someone almost drowned. It scared me because one woman noticed, named it, and wrote it down, while everyone else tried to call it nothing. The pool deck was loud, in the lazy way money gets loud. Music thumped, glasses clinked, someone laughed too hard. Nikea stood at her station, red suit, whistle flat against her chest, eyes scanning bodies that assumed the water was a toy. She clocked patterns, floaters, sinkers, the ones who showed off, the ones who scared easy. She did not drink, she did not dance. She watched. Ji-hoon slipped under without drama. No splash, no arms, just a clean vanishing, like a switch thrown. Nikea's spine went cold. "That's not right," she said, already moving. A man nearby waved. "He's good, just a cramp." Nikea didn't slow. Cramp doesn't freeze your face. She dove. The water felt heavy, wrong, thick as syrup. Ji-hoon's eyes were open. His jaw was locked. His limbs were still, not panicked, not flailing. Paralysis. Her mind ran the checklist at highway speed. Spinal? No impact. Seizure? No clench. Toxin? Yes. God, yes. She broke the surface with him, hooked an arm, kicked hard. "Clear the deck," she barked. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. People stared. Phones came out. Someone yelled, "Security!" Vivian stood back from the pool. White dress, dry hair, perfect posture. She didn't scream. She didn't rush. She watched, lips pressed, eyes calculating. Nikea saw her clock the angle, the crowd, the cameras. It was a cold look, a waiting look. Nikea hauled Ji-hoon onto the tile. His chest barely moved. She checked carotid, thread thin. "Call EMS, now." A man hesitated. "They're already—" "Now," she snapped. And stop filming. She tilted Ji-hoon's head, swept his mouth, started compressions, counted out loud. 1, 2, 3. Old habits, trauma floor habits. Keep the rhythm, keep the brain alive. His skin was warm, too warm. Neurotoxins screamed again in her head, something that paralyzes without stealing consciousness, something clean, something planned. "Breathe for me," she said, like he could hear. "Stay with me." A woman knelt. "Is he drowning?" "No," Nikea said. "He's being shut down." Vivian stepped closer. "You're hurting him." Nikea didn't look up. "Back up." "He has a condition," Vivian said smoothly. "Stress, panic." Nikea finally met her eyes. "Lady, I've seen panic. This isn't it." She sealed, gave breaths, watched the chest rise, shallow but real. She kept going. Sweat ran into her eyes. Her arms burned. The crowd murmured, confused, annoyed, scared of paperwork. Security arrived late. "What's happening?" "Life," Nikea said. "Try not to trip over it." Ji-hoon coughed. A small sound. A win. The deck exhaled. Someone clapped. Nikea didn't stop. She kept him alive until the sirens came, until hands tried to take him away. "Careful," she told the medic. "Possible neurotoxin. He was conscious under. Watch his airway." The medic blinked. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Nikea said. "Write it down." Vivian leaned in. "This is unnecessary." Nikea stood, finally. "So is lying." Their eyes locked. Vivian smiled, thin as paper. "You don't know who you're messing with." Nikea wiped her hands. "Ma'am, I mess with gravity for a living. You're just noise." As the ambulance doors closed, Ji-hoon's eyes flicked to her. Fear, yes, also resolve. He squeezed her fingers, weak but deliberate. "Don't forget," he whispered. "I don't," Nikea said. "Ever." Later, the report would sand it down. Incident, cramp, alcohol. Later, people would say she overreacted, made a fuss. That's how it goes when order wants to keep its face. But on that deck, with the music still playing and the killer still watching, a life was reclaimed the hard way, not with speeches, with pressure, breath, and a refusal to play dumb. That mattered, even if the room missed it. After, when the deck tried to reset, Nikea stayed alert. She noted the way staff closed ranks, the way a manager whispered about donors, the way Vivian drifted into shade like a woman checking her watch. Nikea replayed seconds, timing, dosage guesses, the telltale calm of a body that wanted to breathe but couldn't. That detail never lies. An officer took notes. "So you're saying attempted poisoning?" "I'm saying paralysis without distress. You don't get that from champagne." He sighed. "We'll list muscle failure." "List the truth," Nikea said, "or list your pension." He looked up. "Excuse me?" "Write what you saw," Nikea said evenly, "or don't ask me questions." The officer wrote slower. Vivian returned with a lawyer smile. "You're a hero. Let's keep this simple." Nikea shook her head. "Simple gets people killed." "Careful," Vivian murmured. "You're not from here." Nikea laughed once. "I'm from everywhere. People try to make silence do the work." The manager cleared his throat. "We appreciate discretion. You appreciate clean floors, not my job." When the noise finally died, she sat, hands shaking now that it was safe. Adrenaline spent, precision paid its bill. She breathed, counted again. 1, 2, 3. Slow, honest. A man would wake up alive because she didn't follow the script. Someone would be angry about that. Nikea accepted the tab. That's the deal when you choose oxygen over optics. Later, a judge would read the report and feel the itch of a lie. But here, on the tile, the truth had already done its work. Life reclaimed under threat doesn't need applause. It needs witnesses who don't blink. Vivian Choi arrived like she owned the oxygen. Chanel heels on marble, phone face down, eyes already bored. She smiled the way people do when they expect doors to open before they touch the handle. In court, Boredom reads as confidence. Entitlement reads as lineage. Vivian wore both like jewelry. She sat behind Ji-hoon with her legs crossed, posture loose, gaze drifting. When the clerk called the case, she sighed. "This again?" she whispered. Not to him, not to anyone. It was theater without effort, a shrug aimed at the room. Old hands know the type. They think the law is a suggestion. Her backing was quiet and expensive. Park Ji-hoon's uncle funded her shell companies, paid retainers, moved wires at odd hours. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. Money spoke. Vivian translated. "We're helping stabilize assets," she told accountants. "We're simplifying." Help is a flexible word when you're siphoning. The scheme was clean. Fees here, consulting there, a charity with a soft name and a hard ledger. Percentages shaved, then buried. If anyone asked, Vivian smiled. "It's standard," she said. "Relax." Relax is what sharks say before the water goes still. In chambers, I watched her watch. She didn't look at Ji-hoon when testimony turned personal. She checked her nails. She tapped once, twice, stopped. Control matters to people like her. Emotion is for staff. When a witness described the pool, Vivian leaned back. "Cramp," she murmured. It landed flat, like a bad joke. Ji-hoon finally turned. "Vivian," he said, low. "Stop." She didn't. She tilted her head. "Don't be dramatic," she replied. "You hate drama." That's how leverage sounds when it's been rehearsed. She framed every move as care. "I'm protecting you," she told him later, in a hallway that smelled like paper and coffee. "Your family needs adults." He stared at the floor. Adults in her mouth meant obedience. It always does. The uncle's lawyer leaned in. "Ms. Choi is indispensable," he said. "She keeps things smooth." Smooth is a word men use when they want silence. I wrote it down. I always do. Vivian's arrogance wasn't loud. It was refrigerated. She never threatened. She implied. She never begged. She billed. When reporters asked, she smiled again. "We're focused on healing," she said. "Healing is easy when you're draining blood slowly." At a break, she laughed with a bailiff about shoes. "These floors kill me," she said. "Worth it, though." Worth it for whom, she didn't say. She didn't have to. The room heard it anyway. I've seen worse villains. I've seen louder ones. Vivian scared me because she believed her own memo. She thought help absolved harm. She thought boredom was immunity. She thought backing made her untouchable. When Ji-hoon testified about the money, her jaw tightened for a half second, then it smoothed. "He's confused," she said softly. "Stress does that." Stress is a solvent. It dissolves truth if you let it. I didn't. The record doesn't care about Chanel. It cares about numbers, timing, and intent. Vivian had all three, lined up like pearls. Cold arrogance leaves fingerprints. You just have to look. As she left, she paused. "Judge," she said, polite now, "we appreciate your time." I nodded. Time is the one thing she couldn't buy. Sharks forget that. Courts don't. Outside, her phone lit up. She read, typed, deleted, typed again. "Handled," she said to no one. A court officer heard it. So did I. Small words travel. She never raised her voice, not once. That's a tell. Loud people want attention. Cold people want compliance. Vivian understood rooms. She understood pauses. She understood how to make men older than her feel clumsy. "Trust me," she'd say. "I've got this." And they would, because it felt easy. Ji-hoon stopped trusting her at the day the numbers stopped matching. He told her. "We're bleeding," he said. She smiled. "It's a paper cut." Paper cuts can kill if you keep opening them. When the uncle called, she answered on the first ring. "Of course," she said. "Consider it done." Consider is a luxury word. Done is a threat. I watched her through weeks of hearings. Same suit rotation, same calm, same glance at exits. She was never surprised, only annoyed. When evidence stacked, she leaned back. Context matters, she said. Context is where liars hide. By the time the pool report entered the record, her jaw tightened for a half second, then smoothed. He's confused, she said softly. Stress does that. By the time opening arguments began, the room had settled into its polite lie. Everyone smiled, everyone nodded. The press sharpened pencils like this was going to be tidy. It never is. Trials don't explode at first. They sweat. The defense went first. Smooth, confident, a man with silver hair and a voice trained to sound reasonable. This case, he said, is about misunderstanding, about panic, about assumptions stacked on assumptions. He paced once, just once. The government wants you to see monsters. What you'll see instead are businesses, families, complications. Complications is lawyer code for messes with money. The jury listened, they always do at the start. He talked about ambition, cultural gaps, pressure. He said tragic accident like it was a refrain. When he mentioned the pool, he didn't linger. A cramp, he said. Unfortunate, common. I wrote minimize early in the margin. Pattern, not claim. Prosecution stood without drama. No chest thumping. That was smart. We will show structure, the ADA said, not chaos. We will show intent built slowly. She didn't raise her voice. Old school move. This case is not loud. It is deliberate. A few jurors leaned forward. Loud fades, deliberate sticks. Defense objected out of habit. Narrative, he said. Sustained, I replied. Let them dance. I was watching feet. They argued charts and dates like chess openings. Everyone stayed civil, coffee was passed, legal pads filled. On the surface, it was Sunday best behavior. Underneath, lines were being drawn. At sidebar, the defense whispered, "Judge, this is character assassination." I kept my eyes forward. "Counsel, stick to evidence," I said. Neutral tone, neutral face. Civility is a shield. Use it. Vivian sat still, chin high, legs crossed. She never takes notes when she thinks she's winning. Ji-hun took too many. That imbalance matters. The prosecution called their first witness and then did something restrained. They stopped early. "We'll continue tomorrow," the ADA said. Defense blinked. They wanted a sprint. They got a pause. Pauses make people nervous. In chambers that night, I replayed the day. Defense minimized events. Prosecution framed systems. Defense talked people. Prosecution talked process. That told me where the cracks would form. Day 2, defense pushed harder. "You're asking this jury to believe a conspiracy," counsel said, palms open, "that dozens of professionals looked the other way?" The ADA replied, calm, "I'm asking them to believe paperwork. Paper beats personality 9 times out of 10. A juror coughed, another shifted. Small things. I watched those. Claims are noise, patterns are signal. During cross, defense leaned into tone. "Ms. Abiola," he said, friendly now, "you're not a doctor, correct?" "Correct," she said. "So you guessed." "I assessed," she said. "There's a difference." The room tightened. That's a crack. Defense smiled. "Isn't it true you're trained to expect the worst?" She met his eyes. "I'm trained to notice it." No objection. I let it land. At lunch, a clerk joked, "Feels calm, huh?" I didn't answer. Calm is when you should worry. Back on the record, defense introduced emails. Prosecution didn't fight admission. Another restraint. They knew those emails opened doors later. You don't block a door you plan to walk through. Vivian whispered to her lawyer. He nodded once. She relaxed. That told me something too. She thought she'd controlled the board. People like her always do, right before the middle game turns ugly. Defense closed the week with a line meant to soothe. "At the end of this," he said, "you'll see confusion, not conspiracy." The ADA replied, "Confusion doesn't balance books." A few jurors smiled, not at the joke. at the truth. I kept my rulings tight. No speeches, no lectures. Let the lawyers hang themselves or save themselves. Judges who chase spotlight miss patterns. By Friday, civility still held, smiles still showed, but the air was different. You could feel it in the pauses, in the way questions shortened, in the way answers stopped volunteering. That's when trials begin to crack, not with shouting, with restraint. With people realizing the story they planned isn't the story that's forming, with systems rubbing against truth until one of them gives. And once that sound starts, you don't unhear it. Monday morning arrived like a held breath. The courtroom was full, but quieter than before, as if everyone sensed the hinge point had arrived. I took the bench and saw it in the defense attorney's posture, loose, almost cocky, like a man who thought the board was already cleared. Ji-hoon was sworn in. He sat straight, hands folded, eyes forward. The defense opened with courtesy. "Mr. Park," counsel said, smiling, "you've lived a privileged life, haven't you?" "I've lived inside obligations," Ji-hoon replied. A few jurors nodded. Obligation is a word that lands with age. The questions sharpened. "You wanted out," counsel said. "You wanted the empire gone." "I wanted it stopped," Ji-hoon said. "Stopped because you stood to gain?" "Stopped because people were being hurt." The lawyer smirked. Smirks are tells. They're not for juries, they're for cameras. Then the tone shifted. "Let's talk about Miss Abiola," he said, glancing at Nikkei like she was a prop. "You paid her, didn't you?" "I paid for pool supervision," Ji-hoon answered. "Cash? Standard contract." The smirk widened. Weaponized curiosity. Counsel leaned closer. "How much?" "Objection," the prosecutor said. "Overruled," I said, watching carefully. This was a trap meant to spring itself. Ji-hoon named the figure. It was ordinary, boring. That didn't stop him. "So," counsel continued, voice slick, "a young man, a beautiful woman, money exchanged. That's not business, that's personal." The room went still. This wasn't argument. It was insinuation, as old as dirt. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. He said, "That's disrespectful." Counsel chuckled. "Answer the question." "There is no question there," Ji-hoon said. I let a beat pass. Sometimes silence disciplines better than gavel. The lawyer pushed anyway. "Were you sleeping with her?" Gasps. A clerk dropped a pen. "Objection," the prosecutor snapped. "Harassment." "Sustained," I said. "Counsel, step back." But the damage was done. The disrespect had been aired, loud and ugly. I watched the jury. Older faces hardened. They've lived long enough to recognize cheap shots. One man shook his head. Another woman crossed her arms. Slang came to mind. Low blow. Defense tried to recover. "You expect us to believe this lifeguard just happened to be there?" "Yes," Ji-hoon said, "because she's doing her job." "And you expect us to believe she saved you out of kindness?" "She saved me because she's competent." Competence again. The word circled back like a ghost. Counsel scoffed. "Or because she was paid to." Nikkei stood before I could stop her. "I wasn't paid to save anyone," she said, voice steady. "Sit down," counsel barked. "I will not," she said. The jury watched. This was no longer chess. It was a street fight in a suit. "Enough," I said. The room snapped to attention. "Miss Abiola, you will remain seated. Counsel, you will change course or you will sit down." He raised his hands. "Just exploring motive, Your Honor." "Explore evidence, not prejudice." The prosecution stood. "Permission to redirect, Your Honor." "Granted." She turned to Ji-hoon. "Why did you pay for professional supervision?" "Because accidents are expensive and negligence costs lives." No flourish, just fact. Defense attempted one last jab. "You're playing hero now?" Ji-hoon looked at the jury. "I'm playing survivor." That landed. Survivors don't brag, they account. By the time the witness stepped down, the air had changed. The crack had split wide. The defense's smirk was gone, replaced with something brittle. You can't walk back disrespect once it's spoken. Jurors remember how you made them feel long after they forget charts. I made a note in the margin, small and final. Contempt wears many suits. Today, it wore silk words and cheap implications. That kind of tactic doesn't just lose cases, it ends them. The afternoon dragged like wet wool. Defense asked safer questions, circling dates, invoices, calendars. None of it mattered anymore. The jury had felt the turn. When disrespect enters a room, it stains everything. You can't scrub it out with procedure. During a break, I watched jurors chat quietly. One said, "That was dirty." Another replied, "Yeah, real low." Slang travels fast among people who know fairness. Nobody mentioned law. They talked about decency. That told me the case had crossed its own line. Back on the record, defense avoided Nikkei's eyes. He spoke to exhibits like shields. The prosecution didn't press. She let the silence do the work. Silence is old school. It's how you let a jury breathe and remember who crossed first. I overruled little, sustained enough. My job wasn't to punish, it was to keep the rails straight. Courts survive on that. The moment a judge starts performing, everyone else starts lying louder. I stayed still. Stillness keeps score. When we recessed, Ji-hoon passed me. He bowed, slight. Respect, not relief. Nikkei didn't look back. She knows the price of standing. Outside, reporters buzzed. Inside, the truth had already landed. You don't hear it, you feel it. That night, I reviewed the transcript. The words looked worse on paper. Smirks don't translate. Insinuations do. They sit there, naked, no charm, no laugh track, just intent. That is why records matter. They don't forget tone. They preserve it. I wrote one more line to myself. Weaponized disrespect is a confession. It tells you what evidence can't. When a lawyer goes there, he knows he's lost control. Control is the real currency in court. Spend it badly, and the verdict collects. By then, the turning point was fixed, not by testimony, but by choice. He chose disrespect, the jury chose memory, I chose restraint. That triangle holds. It always has. When people ask later why everything changed that day, this is the answer. The moment someone showed who they were, and the room believed them. Nothing shouted, nothing collapsed, but the case ended there, slow and final, like a door closing without drama, leaving only the echo of what should never be said, especially out loud, especially under oath, especially when the truth is already sitting in front of you, waiting, patient. The room was already leaning forward when Ji-hoon asked to clarify his last answer. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't look at counsel. He looked at me. That mattered. "Proceed," I said. The defense attorney straightened, wary now. "Mr. Park, you were asked about compensation." "Yes," Ji-hoon said. "And you stand by the figure you gave." "I do," he said, then paused. "But the implication was wrong." The lawyer tilted his head. "Wrong how?" Ji-hoon inhaled once, slow, deliberate. "She was underpaid." It landed like a dropped tray. Not loud, not sharp, just final. The jury shifted. Someone whispered, "Damn." Old folks don't gasp, they murmur. Counsel scoffed. "Underpaid for what, exactly?" "For saving my life," Ji-hoon said. "Objection," defense barked. Reflex more than reason. "Overruled," I said. The moment had earned air. Ji-hoon turned slightly, addressing the jury now. Miss Abiola arrived early. She inspected the pool. She noticed the temperature variance. She saw my fingers lock, not flail. She identified paralysis, not panic. He spoke like he was listing groceries. That's how truth sounds when it's praxised by necessity, not drama. She entered the water before anyone screamed. She stabilized my airway. She prevented spinal damage. She recorded the incident accurately when others suggested edits. Defense tried to interrupt. I lifted a finger. "Sit down." And later, Ji-hoon said, voice tightening just enough, he testified despite knowing the cost. The word cost echoed. Everyone in that room understood it. Counsel tried again. You're painting her as some kind of saint. No, Ji-hoon said. I'm painting her as a professional. That hit harder. Saints are optional. Professionals keep systems alive. The prosecutor stood, careful. Mr. Park, why say underpaid now? Because the insinuation was that loyalty can be bought cheaply. It can't. He looked at Mecca. She didn't look back. Defense leaned forward, voice sharp. You expect us to believe this wasn't personal? Ji-hoon's eyes didn't flicker. It was personal for the people who tried to kill me. A ripple moved through the room. Let's talk about that, the prosecutor asked, quietly. When did you realize? At my wedding, Ji-hoon said. A juror whispered, Lord. There was a bullet, Ji-hoon said. Not meant for me, meant as instruction. Speculation, defense snapped. Overruled, I said. The record already knew. The shooter missed, on purpose. Messages don't need accuracy, they need witnesses. He swallowed. My family understood. So did I. The prosecutor asked quietly, and Miss Ebiola? She wasn't there, but the same people were. Silence pressed in. The room felt smaller, like walls inching closer. Defense tried one last angle. So this is affection? No, Ji-hoon said. This is accounting. That word again. Accounting. Sharks and ledgers. He went on, unprompted now. Affection fades. Loyalty given freely does not. Miss Ebiola did not owe me. That is why I trust her. Trust. Spoken plain, no poetry, no spin. The jury leaned back, almost in unison. You could feel it, the inward collapse. Not chaos, recognition. When a story finally lines up, people stop reaching. I watched faces, a retired machinist, a grandmother with arthritis. They weren't impressed, they were convinced. Big difference. Defense sat down. No more questions. The prosecutor didn't add a thing. Smart move. When the room caves inward, you don't shout into it. I called a brief recess. In chambers, I stared at the wall, not because I was moved, because I was calculating. Truth had weight. Weight tips things. My job was to keep the scale from snapping. When we returned, the air stayed heavy. Ji-hoon stepped down. As he passed Neka, he said low, "Thank you." She replied, just as low, "I did my job." That exchange said more than a week of testimony. I made a note. Loyalty over affection. Survival math. Old as dirt, still rare. Outside, reporters would frame it as drama. Inside, it was simpler. A man named what mattered. A woman refused embellishment. The system, creaky and stubborn, held. Nothing collapsed outward, no shouting, no tears, just a quiet, irreversible shift. The kind that doesn't trend, but decides outcomes. By the time we adjourned, everyone knew. The defense had lost control of the story, not because of evidence alone, but because trust was spoken plainly without asking permission. That night, I reread the line that would be quoted, sliced, misused. She was underpaid. They'd hear arrogance. I heard valuation. The difference separates noise from record. This was the climax. Though nobody cheered, it felt like gravity asserting itself. When loyalty is named without romance, systems adjust or break. Today, the room adjusted. Tomorrow would bring arguments, appeals, and spin, but the center had held. The inward collapse was complete, and in that compression, something durable formed. Not justice, something smaller, something usable, enough to carry the weight of what came next. Park Tae-sok waited until the room settled. He liked rooms after they decided who mattered. They had him in shackles, but they had always had him in something. He stood anyway. Old men know posture as leverage. "Say what you came to say," his attorney whispered. Park didn't look at him. He looked at his son. Ji-hoon met the stare. He did not blink. That bothered Park more than anger ever could. "You're weak," Park said, voice flat. "You let clerks and lifeguards tell you who you are." A murmur ran. Old folks shifted. Somebody muttered, "Hell." Park turned slightly and spat on the floor. It was deliberate, thick, contempt made visible. "Clean that," a marshal snapped. "No," Park said. "Let it sit. That's what this is." I struck the gavel once. "Mr. Park." He smiled without humor. "Your Honor," he said, mocking the words. "You think this is authority?" "Sit down," his attorney said, urgent. Park ignored him. "I built an empire," he said. "Ports, routes, men who showed up. This," he nodded toward the jury, "paper." "Objection," defense said, panicked. "Overruled," I said. I wanted the record complete. Park pointed at Ji-hoon. "You think survival is truth-telling. It's not. It's silence. It's knowing when to keep your mouth shut." Ji-hoon answered quietly, "And when to open it." That landed. Park's jaw tightened. "You owe me everything you breathe." Ji-hoon shook his head. "I owe the people who kept me alive." Park laughed, sharp. "A lifeguard?" he scoffed. "You traded blood for help." I leaned forward. "Enough." Park looked at me then, really looked. "You're retiring," he said. 6 months. You won't be here for what follows." "That may be," I said, "but you will be here for this." He sneered. "Say it." "You do not get to rewrite the meaning of strength in my courtroom," I said. "You do not spit on the floor and call it truth. You do not reduce human beings to tools because you are afraid of what they see." The room went still. Even Park paused. I continued. "You taught your son power without restraint. Today, you are watching restraint expose power." Park's voice dropped. "He is no son of mine." Ji-hoon replied, steady, "That's the first honest thing you've said." A gasp, old school gasp, the kind that leaks. Park's shoulders sagged a fraction, then he recovered. "You'll regret this," he said to me. "Cities run on men like me." "Cities survive despite you," I said. "Sit. Now." For a moment, I thought he wouldn't. Then he sat. The shackles clinked. Sound carries weight. I addressed the room. "This court will not be used as a stage for contempt. Final statements are concluded." As marshals approached, Park muttered, "Weak." Ji-hoon didn't respond. Neither did I. Authority doesn't chase the last word. When they led Park away, the spit remained on the floor until a clerk cleaned it. That mattered too. The center had held. Gravity had spoken again. Not loudly, not kindly, just enough to remind everyone who was in charge. People sat with that. Jurors stared at the bench, then at their hands. Someone coughed. The gallery felt older, heavier, like a VFW hall after taps. This wasn't television, it was reckoning, slow and unglamorous. Park tried once more as he was turned. "You think this ends me?" he said. "It ends this," I replied. He shook his head. "You'll need men like me." "We need rules," I said. "Men come and go." Outside the windows, traffic moved. Ordinary. That mattered. Systems prove themselves by what keeps moving. I addressed Ji-hoon. "You are excused for today." He nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." He meant it, not as deference, but as relief. Neka stood when told, posture straight, hands calm. "You may step down," I said. "Yes, ma'am." Simple. Respect without fear. The jury filed out. One man whispered, "About time." Another said, "Amen," slang for closure. When the doors closed, I let the room breathe. Authority isn't volume, it's timing. It's knowing when to let silence finish the sentence. I made my notes. Contempt addressed, record clear, boundaries restored. That's the job, not heroics, maintenance. Later, people would argue I humiliated him. Nonsense, he did that himself. I just refused to blink. This is how courts survive, old bulls. You don't wrestle, you set the fence and let gravity do the work. I left the bench steady. The next phase would be quieter, colder. That was fine. Order had been asserted, clean and public. Power hates mirrors. Today, it got one. History will argue, pundits will posture, and headlines will holler, but the record will show a judge drew a line, held it, and reminded a room that law still has teeth when pressure mounts hardest, today alone. Sentencing is where noise goes to die. I took the bench with the room already standing, not out of respect, but habit. Old habits matter in old rooms. Park Tae-sok was brought in last, shackles again. He looked smaller now, not beaten, just finished. Power doesn't age well under lights. "Sit," I said. He sat. I read the counts without drama. Racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy, attempted murder. Each word landed like a brick, plain and heavy. His attorney tried one last time. "Your Honor, legacy." "No," I said. "Legacy is what remains when restraint is practiced. What your client built was not legacy. It was dependency enforced by fear." Park smiled thin. "You call it fear. I call it order." "Order," I replied, "doesn't require poisoning a pool." A ripple moved through the gallery. Somebody whispered, "Damn." I continued. Sociopathy borrows the language of structure. It calls control stability and exploitation efficiency. Courts exist to translate that lie. Park leaned forward. "You think a sentence fixes anything?" "I think it stops you," I said. "That is enough." I addressed the record. The court finds no mitigating factors. Wealth is not mitigation. Age is not mitigation. Intelligence is not mitigation. His son did not look at him. That mattered. "On the charge of racketeering," I said, "this court sentences you to life without the possibility of parole." The words settled. Life without parole has weight. It doesn't shout, it ends sentences, conversations, futures. Park's face tightened. "So this is how it ends." "This is how it stops," I said. He laughed once, short. "You'll miss me." "No," I said, "the city won't." I turned to the marshals. "Remove the defendant." As they lifted him, Park spoke again, softer. "You taught him to betray blood." I answered without looking up. "You taught him survival." The doors closed behind Park. The room exhaled. Not relief, finality. There's a difference. I finished the formalities. Credits applied, appeals noted, process respected. Old school, by the book. When I looked at the jury, they looked back. Tired, certain. They had done their part. I addressed them. "You may go. Thank you for holding steady." One man nodded, another wiped his eyes. No applause. Good. Ji-hyun stood when I did. He did not smile, he did not bow, he simply breathed. Outside, cameras waited. Inside, we stayed quiet. Courts don't need confetti. I gathered my papers. The clerk asked, "Anything further, Your Honor?" "Yes," I said. "Let the record reflect that power ends here when it cannot justify itself." She typed, keys clicking like rain. As I left the bench, I felt the familiar calm. Not pride, not triumph, closure, controlled, earned. Later, pundits would argue mercy, vengeance, optics. I had no patience for that noise. This was arithmetic, not poetry. Life without parole is not a storybook ending. It is maintenance. It keeps the lights on. It tells the next man watching that mirrors are real. Sentencing is not theater for me, and it never was. It is a ledger. Debits, credits. Risk reduced, harm contained. People want emotion. I give them math. I said it plainly for the record. Mr. Park, the court rejects your definition of family as ownership. Family is not a balance sheet. He stared, waiting for mercy. No dice. I reminded the room that charisma is not character, that silence is not innocence, that a long run does not make a good run. Old men in the gallery nodded. They've seen hustles age into habits. Park tried to speak again. The marshal shook his head. I allowed one sentence, I said. Make it count. You're afraid, Park muttered. I'm careful, I answered. There's a difference. I explained parole in language without varnish. No hearings, no clocks, no hope dressed up as policy. Just walls, routine, and time. The jury listened hard. Truth lands better when it's not dressed fancy. I addressed Ji-hyun once more. You will live with this, I said. That is not punishment. That is reality. He replied, I can live. That was enough. The clerk read the order, the seal stamped, the case closed. People stood, because that's what people do when something ends. I stayed seated a moment longer. Judges do that when the wait settles late. This wasn't victory, it was containment. It keeps the city boring. Boring is underrated. Outside, someone yelled a question. I didn't answer. Courts speak once. When I finally rose, my knees complained. Years do that. Still, my hands were steady. That matters. I left the bench knowing the line held today, and that tomorrow someone else would test it. They always do. Sentences don't heal families. They draw borders. They tell predators the game has limits. They tell witnesses that they were seen. That night, in that room, the law did its narrow job. Not salvation, not revenge, just a line held and enforced quietly, steadily, without speeches, without slogans, without mercy theater, today only. I paused at the door and looked back once. The seal on the wall, the empty chair. Legacy, I thought, is restraint remembered. Then I walked out. The files closed without ceremony. No press, no applause, just signatures, dates, and a silence that felt earned. Cases like this don't end, they taper off, like a storm moving out to sea. You don't chase it, you just notice the air is lighter. By morning, Ji-hyun Park's cell was empty. So was Nneka Okoye's apartment. The marshals didn't announce it. They never do. They used neutral phrases. Relocated, secured, assets transferred. The kind of language that sounds like accounting. Anyone watching from the outside would have assumed witness protection. New names, new lives, clean slates. The government's quiet apology. That's what the rumor mill said, anyway. I knew better. I sat in chambers with a cup of coffee gone cold, flipping through a thin memo stamped "Compliance Complete." No addresses, no destinations, just timestamps and signatures from people who never put their faces on anything that mattered. My clerk hovered by the door. "They're gone?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Protection?" I looked up. "From whom?" She didn't answer. Smart kid. The truth was simpler and harder. Ji-hyun didn't need protection. Neither did Nneka. They weren't hiding from predators anymore. They had become ghosts by choice, not fear. There's a difference. Witness protection builds pages with better paint. This was something else. A disappearance done right. I'd seen it before, back when I was young enough to think justice came with closure. Sometimes the system knows when to step back. Sometimes it pretends to not see a door opening and lets people walk through it. Down in records, a deputy muttered, "Hell of a trick, vanish after a verdict." Another replied, "Yeah, like smoke." They laughed, low and nervous. That afternoon, I signed the last order tied to the case. No flourish, no final speech. The law had already said its piece. Anything more would have been noise. I shut the folder and slid it into the archive bin marked "Closed, no further action." Funny thing about that word, closed. It never means what people think. I ran into the prosecutor in the hallway. He looked 10 pounds lighter. "Judge," he said, "you hear they're safe?" I met his eyes. "I hear they're finished." He nodded. That was enough. At home that night, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees, listening to the neighborhood settle. A dog barked 2 houses down. Somewhere, a television murmured about the weather. Ordinary sounds, the kind you miss when life's been loud too long. I thought about Nneka's voice on the stand. Calm, measured, no tremor. A woman who'd already paid every price they could demand. I thought about Ji-hoon's stillness, the way he never once looked back at the gallery, like he'd already burned the bridge in his mind. Some people survive by starting over. Others survive by stepping sideways and letting the world pass where they used to stand. I poured myself a small bourbon. Doctor says moderation. At my age, that's a punchline. Good riddance, I said to the night. Not to them, to the danger. A week later, an envelope appeared on my desk. No return address. Inside, a single postcard. No message, just a picture of a shoreline at dawn. Empty, clean, the horizon doing what it's always done. My clerk frowned. That from them? I slid it back into the envelope. No idea. She waited. They don't need protection, I said finally. They needed an exit. She smiled, soft. Think they'll be okay? I thought of the seal on the wall, the empty chair, the line we'd held. They're already okay, I said. They just stopped being visible. That's the thing about real endings. They don't wave, they don't explain. They just leave you with quiet and the sense that something heavy finally set down its bags. I turned off the lights in chambers and locked the door. Somewhere, 2 people were living under different skies, unremarkable, untraceable, free in the only way that lasts. And for the first time in months, the law had done enough. The postcard arrived on a Tuesday, slipped between circulars and a charity appeal, addressed in clean block letters to my private home. No court seal, no return address, just my name, spelled correctly, without title. That alone narrowed the field. I stood at the kitchen counter and turned it over twice before opening it. Old habit. You learn early that unexpected mail carries intent. On the front was a painting of Jeju Island. Not a photograph, a painting. Basalt cliffs, dark and steady, rising from water the color of tempered steel. A narrow strip of sky, pale, disciplined. No boats, no people, just land that had learned how to hold. I sat down. Inside, 3 lines. Blue ink, unfancy pen. Judge, we are well. Thank you for the line you held. That was it. No names, no signatures, no sentiment. Capability doesn't ramble. I exhaled, slow. At my age, you notice when your shoulders drop. It means something heavy just left the room. My sister called that evening. She does that, checks in, makes sure I'm eating vegetables and not lecturing strangers at the diner. You sound lighter, she said. Mail, I told her. She laughed. Bills again? Something like that. I didn't elaborate. You don't explain postcards like this. You absorb them. I set the card on the table and made coffee. Strong, the good stuff. If you're going to reflect, you might as well be awake for it. Jeju Island. Volcanic. Self-made. I'd never been, but I knew the type. Places that look calm because they survived pressure, not because they avoided it. The message wasn't gratitude alone. It was a status report. We are well. That's not relief. That's readiness. The phone rang again later. Different caller. Former colleague. You hear anything? He asked. About. You know. I smiled into the receiver. Retirement agrees with me. He snorted. Figures. City's quiet. Quiet isn't empty, I said. It's held. He paused. You always did talk like that. That's why they paid me, I said, and hung up. That night, I took the postcard onto the porch. The air had that late season bite. Honest cold, the kind that keeps you from lying to yourself. I thought about the trial, the way power flinched when it saw a mirror. I thought about the line, thin, necessary, non-negotiable. Some people think judges dispense mercy. Others think we dispense punishment. Both miss the point. We dispense boundaries. Everything else is theater. The postcard didn't ask for forgiveness. It didn't promise to behave. It didn't say goodbye. It said, thank you, the way professionals do, when a job is done cleanly and everyone knows it. I imagined Nineka standing somewhere with wind off the water, shoulders squared, eyes clear. I imagined Ji-hoon beside her, quieter now, lighter, because he'd stopped carrying other people's crimes like luggage. They didn't need protection. They needed distance. I placed the postcard in a drawer with a few others I'd kept over the years, notes without names, proofs without evidence, the kind of things you don't cite but don't forget. Before bed, I read the lines once more. Thank you for the line you held. Lines matter. Without them, strength turns sloppy. With them, even silence can do work. In the morning, the city would argue again. They always do. But somewhere, two capable people were standing on solid ground, not hiding, not hunted, just living. That was peace backed by strength. And that, I decided, was enough.
Chapter 15. Dangerous Good People. Christmas cards arrive like weather reports. Predictable, polite, thin. I open them at the kitchen table, coffee cooling, courthouse quiet behind me. Judges collect them the way old hands collect scars. Proof you stayed in the ring. Proof you didn't flinch when it got loud. Most cards say the same thing, dressed up with gold ink and fake cheer. Season's greetings, best wishes, stay warm, stay safe, as if safety were a sweater. One card that year came plain. No ribbon, no return address worth noting. The clerk raised an eyebrow. Problem? She asked. No, I said. Just paper. She nodded. Clerks know when not to poke. They've seen enough to cut the noise. Inside, the message was short. Not a thank you, not praise, just a line acknowledging the line. It reminded me of something my father said when I took the oath. Do the job, don't expect applause. That card understood the assignment. Justice isn't outcomes. Outcomes are headlines and body counts and victory laps. Justice is process held steady when everyone wants a shortcut. It's boring by design. It's by the book when the book is under fire. People confuse mercy with weakness and speed with courage. They're wrong, plain as day. I saw it again at church on Christmas Eve. Candles, hymns, the usual ritual. A retired prosecutor leaned over and whispered, "You sleep yet?" Old habit. We talk shop like fishermen talk weather. "I do," I said. "After that case?" "Because of it." He smiled. "Good. Means you didn't sell the farm." Selling the farm is the temptation. Take the deal, take the applause, take the easy exit. Justice asks for restraint instead. It asks you to hold the door when power tries to rush the room. That night, we held it. No speeches, no mercy theater, just a square deal. Later, at home, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Judge," a voice said, steady, respectful. "I'm listening. Just checking in. We're settled." "That's all?" "That's all." No names, no addresses. Capable people don't narrate. They execute and move on. That's the part pundits miss. The good ones don't need protection when they can protect themselves within the law. Witness protection is a story for television. Real life is quieter. Real life is competence paired with restraint. I mailed my own cards the next morning. To colleagues, to a clerk who kept her mouth shut, to a bailiff who stood like a wall when tempers flared. I wrote the same thing on each. Hold the line. Nothing else needed saying.
At Chambers, a junior judge asked for coffee. "Did we do enough?" he asked. "We did the job. Enough is someone else's math." He frowned. People wanted more. People always do. That's why they don't sit here. He laughed, then sobered. "I want to sleep like you do." "Then don't borrow trouble and don't confuse justice with outcomes." The holidays passed. The city argued. They always argue. Talk radio chewed the case like gristle. Some called it soft, some called it harsh. None of them had to read the file twice or watch a witness breathe through fear without blinking. None of them felt the room go still when calm beat volume. By New Year's, the cards were filed away. The kitchen table cleared. The coffee tasted better. I slept better, too, not because everyone was happy, but because the work was clean. Clean work lets you rest. Dirty work keeps you up. People like to believe the good guys are gentle. That's a bedtime story. The good guys are dangerous in a disciplined way. They know where the line is, and they guard it without swagger. They don't hunt, they don't hide, they stand. One afternoon, a neighbor caught me by the mailbox. "Saw the news," he said, low voice, old school courtesy. "Rough business." "It's work," I said. He shrugged. "World feels upside down." "It always does. That's why rules matter." He laughed. "You sound like my grandfather." "Smart man," I said. Back inside, I thought about Christmas cards again. They're small artifacts, but they tell the truth. The flashy ones fade, the plain ones stick. Same with cases. Loud outcomes age badly. Quiet justice holds up. You don't frame it, you live with it. At a family dinner, my sister asked, "You ever wish you'd done something different?" I shook my head. "Wishing is for gamblers." She smiled. "You're stubborn." "Consistent," I corrected. Consistency is the muscle. It's how you keep from drifting when pressure mounts. It's how you make peace with nights and mornings. It's how you teach the next judge without lecturing. You show up, you read, you listen, you decide. Then you go home and sleep. That winter, snow came late. Streets stayed clear, the city moved on. Somewhere, a couple lived ordinary days. Somewhere else, predators learned the limits. No sirens, no speeches, just boundaries enforced. On the last workday before January, the clerk lingered. "Judge," she said, "you think it mattered?" I looked at the seal on the wall, the empty chair. "It mattered to the people who needed it," I said. "That's the only crowd that counts." She nodded. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas," I said back. The good guys won, not with fireworks, with restraint. And they're dangerous enough to keep it that way. For now.